and I'm so happy to have you tonight. Um,
Thanks.
Actually, really lucky that we're having this live because I had a few technological difficulties. So I'm glad to be here. Tina, could you give a quick introduction to who you are and what you do? And then we'll just hop right into some questions that I've gotten.
Sure. Okay, so my name is Tina Mayer. I'm a licensed mental health counselor in Jacksonville, Florida, and I work primarily with family court cases. So I work as a reunification counselor, I work as a guardian ad litem, I work as a parenting coordinator, anything that has to do with high conflict or family conflict around family court. So I encounter parental alienation a lot in my practice.
So I'm sure that you must get this question a bunch. And I got this question a bunch from parents. And by the way, anybody who's on the live, please feel free to add all of your questions in the chat that you have for Tina, and we will get to those soon, or topics you would like us to discuss. But the question I have that many people were asking, and I am curious about hearing your answer, is um, should parents tell their child that they have been alienated, or how to help their children who've been alienated, how to help them understand what they are going through?
Wow, you're gonna start with big guns. You're just gonna
Yeah.
dive right into the hard questions. Um, the first question you asked was, should parents tell their children that they're alienated?
Mhm.
Okay, nobody's gonna love this. It depends because sometimes the children are not ready to hear it. They don't understand what alienation is. It really depends on the child where they are in the process. Um, if they're adults, it depends on where your relationship was. I know that that's not what people want. They want concrete answers to that, but you really have to look at where the child is. So, one thing that I would encourage anybody who's working with kids in this situation to do is to start to sit in the child's point of view, because that's where the mistakes get made, is parents are coming at it from an I point of view, like, I've been wronged, I've lost time, I need this, I want justice, I, and they don't really take the time to understand what their children are seeing or what they might be going through or encountering, because from their point of view, that's confusing. They've been told one thing, they've got some confirmation bias probably, so actions have kind of confirmed what their beliefs are. They're struggling to understand, and all they really want is to get out of the middle. They do not want to be in the middle of any of this. And so the more that we put them in the middle by asking them questions or trying to give them information instead of letting them sort of unfold it, that makes it harder for them, and sometimes can entrench them even further. So
So,
you have to be really, really careful how you navigate that.
okay, that makes sense. I think that's a fair answer. For people who are just now joining, please feel free to leave all your questions in the chat and any topics you'd like us to discuss. Tina, back to what you were saying. When is it appropriate to tell your child those specific cases, and how might you go about that?
Okay, so again, you're not going to tell a 7-year-old the same thing you'd say a 15-year-old, the same thing
Yeah,
you'd say a 5-year-old. So pick your poison and adjust the dosage,
yeah,
really. Um, but you can answer questions. So if somebody asks you, well, daddy said you did this, you can say, I prefer questions. So I prefer Socratic method. So if a child says, well, I believe X, Y, and Z about my parent, then
mhm,
I'm going to ask them questions about that. Well, why do you believe that? What things have you seen? What things have you heard? Tell me more detail about that. And as they start to sort of walk through that, then they're answering their own questions. And then you can throw in things like, well, does that make sense? In if this happened and this happened, does that make sense to you? And tell me how, and help me make sense for me. So the
mm,
ask them questions, the more they have to do the thinking. And critical thinking is probably the one aspect of this that instead of telling them, you
Mhm,
have to help them learn to think, because one, it's an inoculation, right?
mhm,
You're learning how to critically think through what other people are doing, what they're saying, how they're acting,
mhm.
versus being told and being obedient, because
Yeah,
that's what an alienated child is doing. They're being told something and they're being obedient. So
I
once you activate that critical thinking skill,
mhm.
you open up a world where they're starting to question, well, is that the truth? Is that what I'm supposed to be doing? Is that where I really believe I need to be?
That's so important. I've often thought about that. That's so important. So we have some questions. Yay. Okay. So Lisa Sylvie asks, is moving a case of parental alienation to juvenile court a good idea if the judge in family court doesn't have the jurisdiction to follow the recommendation of the evaluator?
That is very much more of a legal question than it is a mental health question, and one I'm not entirely sure I can answer, especially because in Florida things are different than they are in Texas or in Colorado. So the way our system works would be different
Okay.
to where she's calling from.
Makes sense. Well, she has another question, so let's go to that, and then I'll come back to Daniel's question. She asked, oh, she added that the evaluator has recommended the minor to be temporarily placed in a medical health facility to be deprogrammed and to watch for suicidal ideation. Wow.
That's heavy. Um, one thing I'm going to caution anyone, especially online, is when you want to know the answer to a question that's kind of really case specific, be very very careful. I mean, I I'm not omniscient. I don't know, I don't know everything, and unless you've really kind of looked at a case, sometimes it's dangerous to give specific answers. You can give generic questions. So my generic answer to that would be, carefully think through, what does that mean? And again, is anybody putting themselves into the place of the child? Are they making suicidal declarations? Are they acting out in a way that they need to be supervised in a very specific way? Without those details, I would be really remiss to answer that question. That would not be a really wise to do. But when you're looking at your case, always think about, what is going to help this child get further down the road, or am I going to traumatize them further?
Hmm.
What
That's
and evaluate that. And then when you've got like 100 professionals giving, everybody's got a different opinion in it, then that can really become a very muddied water, and nobody's stopping. And sometimes everybody needs to stop and breathe and
mm,
take a look at it. Can we just slow down instead of pushing everyone forward into another snowball that's going to cause more trauma?
yeah. Yeah.
And I'm
Jeez.
sorry that I'm not giving you a specific answer. I know that's disappointing, but it's very hard to give specific case answers.
Well, here's a question that you might be able to give an answer to. Daniel asks, "Is parental alienation a term or label that can be allowed in court, or does this have to be argued using other language?"
Now, again, that depends on your judge. So, I mean, you can look into their history, or your attorney might be able to give you that question. But I have, even in my own court cases, it's not that I have anything against the term parental alienation, because I clearly do not. But I tend to highlight behaviors and behavioral patterns more so than anything else, because when you're trying to prove a specific thing, then you might get stuck, and it might be easy to kind of have that argument derailed. But when you're showing patterns of behavior, and you can show a timeline with patterns of behavior and specific responses, then you can show that this is likely to continue.
Mm,
So you have consistent and persistent behaviors versus situational behaviors. And when you can show a pattern that is not going away, then you can argue that that pattern isn't going to go away, and some intervention needs to happen in order for it to change.
good, very good information. What are some of those terms that could be used for behaviors that are alienating behaviors? Like I've heard gatekeeping. Is that a good term to use?
Gatekeeping is well known, because that is what it is. You're trying to keep the other. But if you use any coercive control behaviors, so if anybody's familiar with the power wheel, I think it's Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo. They put out a really great power wheel where they put the alienating behaviors onto the power wheel. And I know if I'm speaking gibberish to me, I'll just well, maybe we can find that link or
Yeah,
something. But that using those behaviors and connecting things to those behaviors is probably your safest bet, because everybody's familiar with coercive control. There
mhm.
isn't an argument that that doesn't exist, so you're not going to be able to argue those behaviors very easily.
That's a good point. So let's see. Mark B says I have contact with my 27-year-old son now for 2 years after 5 years of no contact, but he still has times where I feel he is avoiding and definitely controls communication. He does live on his own. I'm guessing mom still has a hold on him. So it's I will just say first of all, and then Tina, yeah, I would like to hear your opinion from people you've worked with, but I think it's a really hard process of reuniting after being severely alienated, and it's something that I haven't heard people talk enough about because I don't even think there is enough research or um, awareness about this specific process. But I have several friends, even on our team or in the support group, who are so anxious and have a hard time with that process. And it doesn't mean they don't love their parent, and it doesn't mean they don't want a close relationship with their parent. It's just really difficult to break through those beliefs you've had for so long and to figure out who your parent really is. But maybe you can add a specific question or anything you're looking for specifically, and we can help more.
If I could piggyback onto that too, is this process of alleviating all the guilt and shame that you carry from having alienated a parent, and you're still processing through things like discovering that your life wasn't everything that you thought that it was. And so sometimes you do go through periods of like, maybe I need to go forward, maybe I need to step back. But if you're open and just staying kind of positive and don't put any kind of guilt or pressure on someone, and just leaving room, you just got to leave space for them to move into the space. Because one of the things that I always give an example is like, if somebody's trying to hold on to you, you're going to start pulling backward. But if you're just putting your open hand, then that gives them space to come forward. So if you're doing that, or I think my favorite way of describing this is, if you have and I'm not calling alienated children wounded stray dogs, but if you have a wounded stray dog that you're trying to help,
Mhm.
and if you chase the
Uh,
dog's way. But if you can sit quietly, don't make eye contact, put a little treat beside you, and just let them come to you, then they can come in on their own terms and then kind of ease into it when they feel comfortable and safe. But
yeah.
you're sitting still, you're not grabbing, you're not eager, you just be still and let them come in to you.
Yeah, that actually there's one study that I read from the University of Tasmania. I did a video reacting to it on the process when you're an adult and you've gone through this, the process of reconnecting. And it said the number, like one big factor is to have it be child led, to let them have the control and child led. I want to add, but we'll come to Amanda's question in a second. I just want to finish up with what Mark was saying because he said, okay, he did, first of all, his son doesn't know that he was alienated. And also, he's asking how to talk to him about not being happy with our communication levels.
About him not being
So,
happy
correct
with.
me if I'm wrong, Mark. It sounds like he wants more communication and a better, deeper relationship with his son, but he doesn't know how to get that, essentially.
Okay, so I'm going to give you one example that I was working with someone who initially asked me to come in and mediate. Now, this is stick with me for a second. The child they had not seen each other in 40 years. The child lived in another country. He was here in the United States. There was some property in another country that belonged now to the daughter, and they had to go do this together or something. But he was struggling getting this kind of negotiated out because he was trying to use it as a tool to force the child, who is now an adult, to come and meet him in person to get these things out of this place.
Mm,
So, what we worked on basically was changing his communication, because she wasn't interested in being mediated or forced into anything. So, I just started editing his emails. And what I did basically was pull out anything that sounded, again, like I'm reaching, I'm grabbing, I'm holding on, or that it's about me.
mm,
No I statements, no blame statements, nothing. So it was very child focused, and long story short, it took a little bit of time, but they now have communication. They did meet together for the first time in 40 years at this place. It was really an amazing reconnection, but he had to step outside of his own desire to control or want more, and again make room. Like, you just had to make room, and she had to feel comfortable enough that everything that I've believed in my entire life is
mm.
not true. So you have to be not be the what you've been portrayed as being. You have to be available and be loving and be kind and all of those, and trustworthy. But changing how you navigate or how you word things might be helpful, because if it's coming at like, I need you to understand for my sake, versus I just want to be available to you and be here for you. I don't know if that's making sense, but
It makes total sense to me. I think that's amazing advice. Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's see. Amanda says, did I forget? I don't want to miss anybody. Um, okay, I think we're on to, oh yeah, Amanda says, my husband and I are watching together. Hi, thanks for being here. His two boys are being alienated severely. We looked at your website and we are interested in the 3 to 5 day reunification therapy camp at your facility. We live near Detroit. Can you provide more info on the camp and if this might be possible for us if we can get the court to approve it? Do you have a wait list?
lots of things. Okay. It's not, I do want to say, like, it's not really a camp. Like, people, I think, are getting kind of this, like, we drag people away into this secluded space and tuck them up. It's really not like that. If you came to Florida, into Jacksonville, you get a hotel or Airbnb, and we do specific long sessions. So the sessions go anywhere from 3 hours to 8 hours, depending upon the people who and what is needed. But they're not, like, we're not sitting around on couches talking at each other all the time. These are activities. I have a mobile office. It's a reconstructed ambulance, and we go to, I'll take people to the beach or to different outdoor facilities or different activities to kind of get everybody reconnected. So no, there's not a wait list per se. So if somebody were to be able to come down and do that, then that's, and it's usually 3 to 4 days, depending upon what the needs are and how fast the kids acclimate. So sometimes after 10 minutes, I am superfluous. I am not needed at all. And then others need more work. It really depends on the readiness of the child and where they're at. But to answer your question, it's not a problem to get in to see us. It's just a matter of getting the court to order it, and then being able to do the follow-up and the pre-work that would need to be done, because sometimes coming in cold is, sometimes it's necessary, but sometimes that's harder. So it really depends on the case.
Um, okay, let's see. Amanda says, oh wait, no, sorry, I'm reading the same question again. Meredith says, I just worked through the membership to join, so I missed the beginning. Okay, these lives are saved, so don't worry. You can go back and rewatch the beginning. She says, have you discussed or are you aware of what is needed to convince the courts of alienation? We were,
Wow.
yeah, we were talking about this for a bit at the beginning. I think it might be helpful for you to rewatch after we're done. But what would you add? Is there anything you would add, Tina?
If you focus on the alienation again, the only thing I would say is if you can focus instead of on the words alienation, focus on the behaviors and the patterns of behaviors. The 5-factor model is phenomenal. If anybody is not familiar with that, Amy Baker and William Burnett and um, what they've created is basically something that I use when I'm doing evaluations. So I plug the behaviors into the 5-factor model in a timeline format. So let's say from June to August, this certain behavior kept repeating itself, and I have text messages or emails or some other videos or whatever. So I can plug in the proof of that. Like this pattern of behavior is happening, these behaviors are happening. Using that 5-factor model is going to be very, very helpful. The other thing I'm going to tell everybody all the time is it doesn't matter how great your attorney is, and there's some really good attorneys out there, they're never going to know your case the way you know your case. So you've got to learn to advocate for yourself and set up and make sure you know your case and you're not just, well, I told my attorney. Okay, that's great, but they have other when people say, well, I know I sent you an email, I'm like, I have 3,000 emails. Like, I don't know every little detail. We cannot know it the way you know it. So you've got to be on top of your game, learn these things, get every source that you can get to prepare your own cases and help your attorney. One, it'll save you a lot of money and a lot of time to have your case prepared. There's so many resources out there. Larry DeMarco, his website, the Law Center. There, Ashish Joshi, his book is. If you get any of these resources out there to help you prepare, but organizing in a timeline and showing patterns of behavior, not focusing in on I'm going to prove alienation because that's a hit or miss. You can swing for the fence and completely lose it, or you can hit a home run and it doesn't always make sense why it works in some case and why it doesn't work in another. So focus on things that are concrete and easy to show.
I actually think that's kind of brilliant. Do you show, because I know the 5-factor model, one of those things, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, is the evidence of a close relationship before everything
Mm,
started. So do you even plug in information of that from
yeah. Yeah, so you're proving the 5 factors, which, every time I should know these by heart and I don't always. So the one is that there's a child rejected, one is that there's a previous
loving relationship?
positive
Yeah.
relationship. There's an absence of abuse, and this is the one where people kind of want to accuse, like, there's so much abuse.
Mhm.
Showing the absence of abuse is really difficult sometimes because manufactured evidence, or maybe there was an incident or something that did happen, so you have to really, really hone in on that one. And then the alienating behaviors of the parent and alienating behaviors of the child. When you use those 5 factors and you plug in the information into that 5-factor model, one, it's very cathartic because you can start working through what's gone on, and two, it will help you organize your information in such a way that it makes sense. Because what happens is you come in to court with like 8,000 text messages or all these emails, and it's very random, and you have to think about this from the judge's point of view too. They've got, on a given day, they could have anywhere from 1,500 cases in front of them, and you're just one of them. And they come in, you come into the court and you're there for a few hours, and they've got to siphon through all of those things with two adversarial attorneys who are both trying to prove their points. And it is really, really difficult in that moment when you're sitting there listening to that, who's wrong and who's right and where they need to go. And it can be very overwhelming for a judge and for the people who are working in that particular case. So having supporting information and having it organized and being able to show it in a cohesive manner, that's what's going to help you. And plus, it will help you understand what your children are going through. And again, I'm always going to bring it back around. Please try to make sure you're looking at this from how your kids are feeling, because they're confused. They don't understand. They're not doing something to you on purpose. They're not sitting there. They didn't wake up one day and go, I think I'm just going to blow with my mom. I'm going to blow it off the parent. They don't do that. And this is really hard on them.
Yeah, that's kind of okay. So, first of all, the five-factor model and what you just described, I think we need to make a video on that. That is so crucial. That could help so many
Yeah.
parents. Um,
Yeah.
so let's get that on the books. But then also, um, okay, somebody has another question. Meredith, she says, on the therapeutic route, do you have any special recommendations for teens?
Our favorite. They're now listen, teens are kind of they're a tough crowd because one, they hate being in the middle of any of this anyway. They have their own lives to live. They don't want to revolve their entire life around their parents' conflict. And that's one of those things where you really have to keep in mind that sometimes when a kid says, I don't want to go to your house for the weekend because I'd really rather go hang out with my best buddy and do other things, that's actually what the problem is. It's not like their lives they don't want their lives wrapped around you. So it makes teens even more difficult to kind of reel back in and get kind of going on the right direction. On the other hand, it can also be work in your favor because they want to have a life of their own. So the more you can encourage that and like kind of provide those opportunities, the more open they're going to be able to talk to you about those kinds of things. So there are no there are no cookie cutter cake recipe ways of getting through this. So when you're looking for a therapist for a teen, please pardon this one, but that person cannot just be a bullshitter. They've got to be able to cut it and say what they think and be real. If somebody's just like, "Oh, that must be so hard." Teens hate that. Like they want somebody to come in and just tell them the truth and be honest with them and not take any and call them out on their crap. Like you've got to call them out.
Yeah, Tina, I wonder if that's something you think that alienated kids in general need, because I never I was in therapy since I was 9, pretty much my whole life, but nobody ever caught it till my current therapist, and she really challenges me on lots of things. She does call me out when I'm doing whatever, like um justify trying to justify something, for example. She'll call me out, and it's been so helpful. Like that's what I've needed. Do you think that's it
Hmm.
in general, like for alienated kids, someone who's trauma informed, of course, and
Yeah.
yeah.
It's not about like it's we when we're in school, by the way, like through my entire program, I was working as a volunteer guardian ad litem and I had a case of alienation and I did not know what it was. I'd never heard of it. I'd seen it before in another friend's case, but I was baffled by it. And I'm in school, literally in school, and nobody is telling me that this is parental alienation. Nobody, and I'm sitting crying over this case, like I don't understand what I'm seeing, and no one could describe. So we are not taught these things in school. What we're taught is to validate feelings, and to somebody comes in with the truth, we take them at face value. I have I am not that kind of therapist. I do validate people's feelings. So I don't want people to think I don't want you to validate their feelings, but I'll also push you as to what is driving that feeling. Like,
Mhm.
what is that exactly? And what are you trying to achieve with it? And then if somebody is really saying something that's just kind of off, like they're it's off the wall. You have to challenge it because if you're not challenging somebody's thinking, then how are they growing? If I'm just constantly placating or telling you that, yeah, everything you think is real,
Mhm.
it may be real, it may not be real. Validate it to me, make me believe it. And then that way you're walking through your own feelings. But teens, especially, they know when people are placating them and they hate it. So call it out. But as parents, you can't do that. If you're an alien you cannot be the one to try to point it out. Hands down, stop trying to convince them. You're only making it worse. Don't do it.
So we've covered a lot of important topics so far. Lisa says or asks, when an alienated child parrots back that they have experienced physical abuse, but in reality they have not, what does therapy and the effects of this look like for that child?
Okay, so I'm assuming you're saying that the child is saying that to the therapist. I hope that that's what you mean. And this is kind of what I was just talking about. So when somebody comes in now, in my world, most of my cases are court cases. I don't have somebody just walking in off the street and telling me that they're being abused. Like that's so in my world, I'm constantly questioning, what's happened versus what hasn't happened. But if you pick a therapist out of the phone book, they're going to take at face value everything that somebody says. That's what we're trained to do. That is the training. If somebody comes in and says this is happening to me, we're not trained to say, "Are you sure? Are you
Right.
sure that?" Like that is rule number one. You're not allowed to do that. So in my world, in a perfect world, a therapist would say, "Tell me more about that. Help me understand what just happened," and then not necessarily they should be they sh- therapists should be informed that there is a court case or there's some contention to whether these facts are valid or not, but usually who they're talking to is the alienating parent anyway, so they're getting their history from that parent. That's how you layer a lie. You keep telling and telling and telling, and eventually people go, well, it must be true,
Mm.
and not necessarily the case. So the danger with therapy is that if you're validating a lie, you're layering more concrete on top of it. So
You men-
it's really harder to get out of it.
can I ask you something? Do you find that the kids who do parrot back that they have experienced some type of abuse when they really haven't, do you find that they do it knowingly or they've come to believe that they've experienced the abuse or a bit of both?
I think it's a bit of both. I think there was a really great video on false memories. Um, the name is escaping me at the moment, but I bet if you Googled it, it would come up. And it was done with college kids, and they basically were told that their parents told a story about them getting into trouble with the police with their best friend, and a high percentage of them, and I'm sorry I'm not remembering all the details of it, but a high percentage of them went along with the story and then validated it and said, yes, I remember that happening. And so it is not impossible to entrench a memory into somebody. So when
Right.
I am questioning somebody about that, the best way to see if they're just repeating rote, like if you memorize your story and you start saying your story and you get interrupted in the middle of the story, it's hard to come back in. But if I'm relaying something that just happened to me, like I just spilt my coffee and it went all over my purple paper, I can and you interrupt me in the middle of that story, because this is an event that just happened, I can jump back into it and relay it. But when you're doing something that's memorized,
Mm.
it interrupts your story and kind of derails it a little bit. It's hard to jump back in and remember, okay, I have to say it this way. I have to do. So a lot of the times if the child is repeating a memorized story, I can kind of figure that out by derailing them a little bit. I again, if you're a parent, please don't do please don't do this to your
Yeah.
child. That's not it's not a good idea, especially for you, because you are a part of the process. But a lot of times I can get them to sort of go back and then start asking questions about that are kind of specific
Mhm.
and harder for those things to be said.
Yeah. Okay,
I
this
can figure
thank you.
out what is more true versus what is less true, but there is no concrete way to prove or disprove.
Right.
I
Right. Um, it's I was surprised at first because I never thought I never personally, I never lied. I might have been repeating things I believed, but I never lied. I never told something that was untrue, knowing it was untrue. But I have spoken to people in our group who did, who were coached, and they did lie. And that surprised me. So it seems like there are different types of alienated kids. Do you
Yeah.
find that there are different types of alienated kids? Do you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, actually, I do have one of my cases. The child is an adult now, so we've had conversations about this. And he relays stories about being coached in the car on the way to a place and what they were supposed to say and what they were not supposed to say. And they did what they were supposed to do because they got rewarded afterwards. So that does happen. And again, it's a mix. So you can't really apply one person's experience to another case without kind of getting into the details and into the mud with them.
Yeah, it is good to know that both happen though. So
Well,
it's not the
and
other.
some flat out lie. And one of the then again with teenagers, the other interesting point of a teenager versus a younger child is the younger child is still kind of confused, but teens sometimes they figure out how to play both ends to the middle. And
Mm,
like, I'm already stuck in the middle anyway. I'm going to take this to my advantage. The same child told me too that like he learned to play both parents into the center, and so like okay, but you can be like okay, well, if I'm not going to get what I want here at mom's house, I'm going to go over to dad's house. And any kid in the divorce situation, they you can
yeah.
see it's kind of playing that
I
role.
mean, my husband and I are married, and my 5-year-old tries to, if mommy doesn't give her something, she goes to daddy to ask daddy. I think it's just
Yes, yes.
a natural thing kids do in a way. But um, so Mark, I think I haven't missed anybody. If I have, please leave your question again. Mark says, my 22-year-old daughter is in therapy. With my therapist's guidance, I wrote to the therapist introducing myself so they know there's a loving father. Is it possible a therapist wouldn't even address the separation?
uh, I'm not sure I'm following the question fully.
I'm not sure I am either. Mark, do you think that you could rephrase that question and we'll get back to it in a second? Sorry, I just am not understanding, but I do want to get back to that. Okay, Daniel says, if you fear that your kids will give false statements, is keeping a voice recorder a necessity? Or would this break trust even further? How can a parent navigate this? Oof.
Yeah, that's a tough one for me because I often am coaching parents to stop videotaping. So here's the difference. So I do feel like sometimes if you are still in danger of being falsely accused, having video cameras or things that they're just necessities and you can't get around it. But there is a very big difference between having some video cameras or maybe a voice recorder sitting in the seat of your car versus say that again with a
Mm,
phone. Okay, so and being kind of overt about it. But if you do feel and I do understand there is a genuine need sometimes to have proof that you did not or did not say something or do something. So I'm very mixed about it. I have very mixed feelings. I think it also depends on where you are in the process. So I have had parents who we're making great progress and the kids are starting to respond, but they won't stop putting their phone in the face every time the child like says something or does something. And I'm like, no, now we're in a conflict resolution phase. So now you have to learn how to resolve conflict with your child without proving I already know you have conflict. I don't need proof of it. Now you have to learn how to handle this differently. So it really depends on where you are. But if you are in danger of being lied about, especially if it's something big, then having subtle, like I think that's probably the best term, subtle and not in your face types of things.
it just strikes me how sad that is, that the child and the parent both have such fear around each other that has been entirely created by their other parent. That's terrible. And that's kind of what I think that talking to other people who've been through this and figuring out the truth, like that fear is still there. You have to work through that fear with your parent. It doesn't just automatically go away because you've learned the truth. It's a physical reaction I've had around my dad my like ever since I can remember, like an anxious reaction and fast heart rate, not breathing, like that kind of thing. And it's taken like 2 years for me to now finally not have that reaction.
Right. And one of the other thing is that target parents especially have a complex PTSD too, that they have triggered fears and triggered reactions. And so learning how this is affecting you and what your core drivers are, because the fact of the matter is none of us are perfect, have been perfect parents. None of us are perfect people. We might be doing things that are contributing to the problem. And sometimes I have more problems getting the target parent to stop doing certain things because it's making it worse, because it's not fair. This is not a fair process. There's
Mm.
no fair, there's no justice. And so I often say to people, like, you've got to choose. In this moment, you don't have the luxury of both of these things. You can choose relationship or you can choose right. I'm right or I want justice. You cannot have both. So whichever one you want to choose, you need to choose it. And then when you choose it, go all in. Get what you need. But if you want relationship, then you're going to have to give up your need to be right or your need for justice for a little while. And if you can get the relationship back on track, then you earn, and I hate to say it that way, but you earn the space to have right and justice, because then that can come. But you can't have both of them. And that's not fair. There's nothing fair about any of it. But
No.
this is where you are. And in order to get out of it, you have to make very um, concrete decisions about what it is that you want. And people are children this long, and then you're an adult this long.
Yeah.
So oftentimes, especially if the teen is the one alienated, and again, it depends on the teen, and I'm very specific about my case. Some cases I'm like, no, carry on, and others I'm like, hey, back off, because I think you've got a better shot at a long-term relationship. You have to play the long game. So if you're gonna continue to fight and create drama in this kid's life and kind of ruin, and it's not your fault, again, I'm not blaming the target parent, but if the fight goes on during their late teen years, you have less of a shot at a good good relationship in their adult years. But if you start to kind of reframe how you're doing things, and I have one case right now that we're reframing, and he's doing great at it. And I really feel like when that child is able to break out of the alienator's framework and get out of the house, their adult relationship is going to be phenomenal. But right now, she's just like, I can't, like, I'm trying to get through school. I'm doing these things. I'm trying to have a life. And so in that case, I recommended that he do things differently. So it really does come down to making the right choices for your child in your case. And I know that that sounds like, okay, great, you're not helping me at all. And maybe I'm not, but at the same time, if the more that you can put, and I keep coming back to this, but the more you can put yourself into the place of your child and try really hard to see what they're seeing and feel what they're feeling, because if you cannot empathize with them, you cannot have relationship with them.
That's very important. That's my I know that a lot of people watch my videos are targeted parents, and I hope that my big hope is that targeted parents can understand more the child's experience so they can have more empathy for their child. Nothing makes me sadder than seeing parents who are blaming their children, who are mad at their children. And while I understand why you would feel that way, I also know that for most of these alienated kids, like your daily pain of existing is so bad you just want to sleep. Like it's really bad for the kids. Let's So Mark adds that he tried to rewrite his question. He said, "My 22-year-old is in therapy. I wrote to her therapist introducing myself so they know she has a loving dad. Is it possible the therapist will never address the separation?"
It's possible. So I'll give you a little synopsis of the different types of therapies and might help you understand why individual therapy is not always the best kind of therapy for these cases. Like we need individual therapists. I'm not knocking that. But individual therapists focus on the needs of their client and they are focused on what that client wants to achieve. Not and sometimes you'll talk about your parents and we talk about, your history and all the things that you come through. But ultimately, the therapy focus is on that particular person. They're not going to go typically outside of their box of what that person wants or thinks or feels. So family therapy is different because you're encompassing the family, or couples therapy is so you're encompassing other people and you're focusing on dynamics. So the other part about this that I want people to understand, so reunification therapy is family therapy, but
Mm,
it's child focused. So
mm,
it's a dynamic thing that is child focused. So when I'm using reunification, I'm watching what is the effect, what is happening to this child, because that child is kind of directing what my next steps are. How are they responding to it? So an individual therapist, while they might have some empathy for what you're going through, they're not super likely, especially because you have an adult child, to step outside the box and introduce something new unless the child themselves bring it up. Like they might say, "Hey, I received a letter from your dad." You
oh, okay.
hope for that. You could hope for that, but there's no guarantee of it.
Okay.
And that's because they're not going to go against what their client wants or needs.
Right, 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 right. Yeah, yeah. I've had therapists who definitely enforce the alienation. One that I told, okay, I'm going into contact with my dad again, and she was like cheering for me. So that was not good. Um, do you think that, um, family therapy for alienated kids is preferable than individual?
Yes, depending upon who your family is, what we're talking about with that. So when you're doing family therapy, it encompasses the entire family. So even when I'm doing reunification, I my goal ultimately would be to have moms, dads, step parents, siblings, everybody kind of needs to be a piece of that pie because it's about a dynamic. And when you're trying to fix a family dynamic, you can't fix one little piece of it. Like I love it when people bring their kid in and go, "Hey, fix my child." And I always think, well, are there medical issues? Are there neurological issues? Is there some sort of synapse that's not firing? Is there a chemical imbalance that I need to know about? Why is this child behaving this way? And if the answer to all of those things is no, then I'm going to immediately turn to mom and dad, go, "Okay, well, you're going to have to tell me what's wrong with you people because
Look in the mirror, guys.
this child is not the problem." You can't fix a group dynamic by trying to focus that one person is the problem. That one person might be the most loud or obnoxious part of the problem, but they are not the problem. And so it's a dynamic issue.
I love how you explain that. That makes a lot of sense to me. And Rosanna says, "Have you seen alienated children turn to religion to cope?"
I have seen them use religion to cope. I haven't seen anybody turn to religion to cope. Oh, no, wait, I take that back. I've got one. One just in my head. And that has actually been really, really great because the concept of forgiveness and embracing forgiveness is really a big part of what he's doing. So that was helpful in that regard.
Yeah, I've seen from the adult perspective, and like people who I know, a lot of people you have become religious, and I think that might be a reason. It's correlated with their alienation. I've also seen the opposite because I've personally experienced a lot of religious abuse, and then I think a lot of us, my friends and people I've heard of, they've also experienced religious abuse, which has completely turned people off from religion. I think it can go either way.
Way. I just remembered one other person who I can't believe I forgot about, Earl. He now goes by Joseph, but he this was in one of my Bible study class probably for about a year, and I came in one Sunday morning, and I was overly just kind of like had a rough week, and we were talking about what I was doing, and he had an epiphany. This man was in his late 60s, and he'd never had a word for it before. But that was the first time that he discovered he was an alienated child with a word for it. He knew what had happened to him. He had been kidnapped to another state. He'd lost connection with his father, but he became a Christian when he was 24-ish and decided to forgive his father because that's what he felt he should do, and then reconnected with his dad, and then found out that everything that he had learned was a lie. But he was that, I remember that day. I can't believe I didn't even think about that. But I remember that day where he looked at me, he goes, "Nobody's ever understood or described what happened to me before." I know, right? And then we started talking. So actually, I think he's written to you, Maddie. I'm going to have to reconnect you
Older
guys.
man. Older man.
Yeah, his name, he changed his name officially back to what it was supposed to be before, but his Joseph is his name now. So
Yeah.
he discovered it that day in Bible study class. But religion had been becoming a Christian is what turned him back to his dad, or
Wow.
his father.
Wow. That's not the first story I've heard where a child will have this epiphany of, okay, I'm going to forgive my the targeted parent, like forgive the targeted parent. And they try to rebuild the relationship and they don't even know they had been alienated, and it can go, it's so interesting. Okay. We have some more questions, which is awesome. So special ed doc is remarking on how therapists go with what their client says. And I think if you watch the beginning of this live, you'll see that we kind of talked about that already, and how it's important for alienated kids to have a therapist who will question them gently, maybe because they're traumatized and abused. But let's see. So I'm gonna mess this one up. Zay G Fazinto. Sorry, sorry about that. My relationship with my 10-year-old daughter is stable because I've managed to do the right things in order to keep in touch. Good, that's awesome. But it's a mediocre slash sad relationship. When and how will I see a significant change? I have a feeling that we can't give you a.
Yeah, that's a tough one because it just depends on your case. If you're still in the middle of a legal battle, it could be a while because there's as long as there's a conflict, kind of keeping them. But I have gotten cases where people get turned around really fast, and then others just sort of carry on spotty until the child is able to break free or stand their own ground. There has to be, okay, Newton's law of motion: a body in motion will stay in motion until another body acts upon that to stop the motion. So that's sort of alienation in a nutshell, right? If you're going to continue in the path that you're on unless something comes and derails you and moves you into a different direction. So there has to be some kind of catalyst. But as long as you're maintaining steady connectivity and you're being the opposite of what you're being portrayed to be, then that, and leaving that room and leaving that space, then you're doing the right things, and it improves your ability to kind of move in there and have relationships. But there are no formulas for this, and that's an unfortunate truth. Sometimes it takes a rapid intervention by the court. And then if that's not possible or it's not going to happen, then you have to be able to switch gears and come at it another way and play the long game.
That's what my dad was always told to do, to play the long game. That's what he was always told to do. And he also added that they have no legal battles. So that's great. And he said it's all in her young mind because of the brainwashing. And I feel so bad for you and your daughter because I know how terrible that is. So Daniel Peterson says, what are the dangers and how do you prevent a child's therapist that may be naive to parental alienation and making the situation worse? Good. Good
I
question.
hate it so much just because I get it so often, and The unfortunate thing is that we're not trained. This is not a topic that comes up. I think it needs to be required, and that needs to be changed, state to state. It just needs to, there's got to be education on this, because it's a very counterintuitive thing. When somebody, we don't expect people to lie. You don't expect people to give you a false narrative or to create drama. That's not how we're typically wired. I do think therapists should always think like the opposite thought. So if somebody comes in and tells me one thing, I should always go, well, a differential diagnosis would be, there should be a differential diagnosis on everybody, but that's not how we're taught to operate, and that's unfortunate. So the unfortunate truth is there's nothing really you can do if they're in that therapy session, and other than to try to be involved, but don't be adversarial with a therapist. One mistake I think target parents make all the time is they start fighting with the therapist, especially if the therapist is court ordered. Don't do that. Don't do that. Seek outside help, seek outside guidance if you need it. Um, be involved with the therapy, and ask them to sit down with you, even if you have to pay for the sessions, so that you can talk with them. But don't, as much as they might be saying something that you just want to go, you've got it wrong, don't be adversarial, because that will then just sort of show that you are the problem. And I know that sounds terrible because you're trying to defend yourself, but you have to be able to lay that down. Humility is probably the best friend you could possibly have as a target parent.
None of this is fair.
No, fair.
You
I am
can't.
not, definitely not advocating that it is fair.
No, it's so hard. I think it's a lose-lose most of the time, because often, like, the alienator, they're not always pulling lies out of nowhere. They're using exaggeration of your real flaws, and they're using the mistakes you've made, and they're blowing them completely out of proportion. So, like, for me, realizing the truth, trying to reconnect with my dad, I hate the word triggered, but I do get triggered sometimes because he still has those flaws that my mom used to incite fear and anger in me, use to reject him. So it's hard, and I feel so bad for targeted parents because it's honestly sometimes like, gosh, just give them a break. um
It's hard. It is really hard. But if you can just bear in mind that fighting harder isn't always going to get you what you want, and sometimes the best way to fight these things, and again, it is situational, by situation, but sometimes the best way is to sit and be quiet, organize your information, be able to present things in a thoughtful and cognitive manner. You can't just throw out details and start arguing every little fight. You have to focus on those patterns of behavior, because we all blow up situationally. There's situational versus habitual behavior. And you have to show that, listen, yeah, one time I yelled at you and cussed at your mom, but that was at the height of our divorce, the height of emotions. This is not how I act on a regular basis. You're not going to find 20 different people who are going to tell you the same thing about me. What you're looking at is, do I do this thing habitually? Are there more people because if you're going to act, I'll give you an example. So when I'm working with parents, like especially as a parenting coordinator, and they start, everybody acts really great in the beginning, so I don't, take that a grain of salt. Once I start pushing your buttons, I'm going to get responses from you, because if you're either going to have emotional dysregulation or and control, or you're going to have emotional dysregulation and can't control it.
mm,
So once I start pushing your buttons, and believe me, I'm a great button pusher, I do it all the time. And when I'm getting responses from somebody, if you're responding that way to me, a court appointed human who can then report to the court that these things are
right.
happening, if you're doing that to me, I can guarantee you're doing that to other people, your children, your spouse, whoever. So when I'm looking at patterns of behavior, I'm looking at, is this something that is persistent and consistent, and it whether it's the sales clerk at Publix or my spouse or my kids, or but I have these patterns of behavior and they're kind of across the board. Now some people act great in public and not so great at home,
They
but
sure
there's
do.
a persistent pattern to the behavior. If it's situational, where you're in a space where you're constantly like a divorce situation, especially, that's so stressful, and you're not yourself, and you're more prone to blow up, or maybe you have some health issues, and you're so you have to look at the circumstances surrounding people's behavior as well, but you can't get away from consistency.
Yeah, it's this is so hard. It's like, okay, I'm gonna take your child away from you, and you're supposed to act calm and collected.
Yeah,
And
no, it makes zero sense.
yeah, yeah. But like Tammy just said, you have to take the emotion out of it, and that is such great advice. If you want to scream for an hour in your car before you go into court, go for it. But when you're in court, I think you need to be, do whatever you do. Do math in your head. Do your breathing exercises. Whatever you need to do.
Yeah.
We
And
have. Sorry.
therapists, guardians ad litem, the social investigators, who's ever got their fingers in your punch bowl, you have to be consistent with them and say, and be honest. Like, don't try to backtrack or kind of minimize your bad behavior. Oh no, I totally did blow up that day, and this is what happened. This was what happened before. This is why I did that. This doesn't happen all the time. You're not going to find people who are going to tell you that it does happen consistently. And when I'm doing social investigations too, the same, or any type of investigation, and I'm listening to collaterals,
Mhm.
I'm going to get the truth eventually. And the further out the collateral is from the core unit, the more reliable their information is. And but then I'm also like, well, who are you talking to? Did you see this yourself? So your behavior is going to matter on the long term, because that's going to show what's real and what isn't.
We have another question. What are your thoughts on reaching out to the alienating parents, family? Oh my gosh, that's a good question. With April 25th fast approaching, could that open the door to share PA leaflets or books? Wow, that's a good question.
That would depend, I think, entirely on where they land on the spectrum, because often what I find interesting is, like, there's a parent kind of pushing the alienating parent, or like they're like co-conspirators. So one of their parents is
Oh yeah,
usually
yeah,
kind of involved in it and kind of pushing that along. So you have to pick and choose. I mean, but if there's somebody riding a fence, then that might be good. But you
yeah.
also have to remember that these are people who have relationship with your child too. So a lot of the times, you kind of have to look out whether or not you're protecting their relationship with the child as well. So I've known target parents who've had good relationships with some family members of the alienator, and they have to be really very conscientious that, if because if they get caught, then that jeopardizes their relationship with that person too, the child's, I mean.
Yes, yes. That's why I've talked to all my family members now about all most of this, and my dad's mom, she's so awesome. She's like always been my I'm really close with my dad's mom, and she said she never said anything to me or made any attempts because she was afraid to lose a relationship with me altogether. And it turns out that multiple family members felt that way.
Mm.
Um, if you do, I wonder, what do you think if about this, Tina? Like, if there happened to be in a family situation on the alienator side of the family, a scapegoat or someone who's already estranged, is that a situation you think maybe that you could find an ally?
If
More,
you're looking for allies, sure. If you're looking for inroads,
yeah,
that might backfire on you. So it really depends on what are you looking for. Are you looking, because sometimes I think targeted parents, because they're so beat up, they're just looking for anybody who kind of will say, yes, you're right, or I'm with you. And while that might feel good in the moment, you really need to be. I hate the way this sounds. I genuinely hate the way this sounds, but you have to be very strategic too about if you're in the middle of the conflict or if you're still in the middle of a court case, strategic about who you're approaching and why and how you're doing it, because you don't want to add fuel to the flames. Your kid's already burning. And in every situation, if you could put in the middle your kid, and just remember that they're whatever ammunition is flying around, it's hitting them first. So when I'm working with the two parents, let's say especially in PC, I will often have them bring in a picture or email me a picture of the children, and I'll put the picture in the middle of the table or wherever we're at. And every time the parent says something or does something that's kind of rude or disruptive or about the other parent, I'll take a giant red marker and slash through their face, which is awful. And at the end of it, sometimes I've had pictures where just child's just bloody mess. And I'm like, this is what you guys are doing.
Yeah.
You can't together. This is what you're doing. This is who pays the price. You need to get it together. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, that tells me a lot more about which parent is problematic, or sometimes both in the nightmare cases, both
Yeah.
parents are.
Yeah. Yeah. So Tina, that I have a question, and I'm going to get to the last other one I see here, but I've heard some parents who they step away or they give up, maybe even give up completely because they think that it would be better for their child for them to give up or to step away. Um, but I'm not sure what to think about that or what your thoughts are on that, because in my view, my dad stepping away more and more, my mom was able to do more and more abuse and different types of abuse, and there was no protection for me.
Right. I have very mixed feelings about that too. So again, it really depends upon the case. So like I said, have one parent where I said, you know what, this conflict is just killing it, and if you come about this a back door, so he's still available to her and kind of building a relationship on the backside of it. So stepping away completely, it might reinforce the
Yeah.
thought, don't love me and you don't want. So I don't know if stepping away completely, but stopping the conflict might be a different route to go. So not leaving the situation, but not fighting anymore, like dropping court or n- giving that space, or just kind of creating some peace, or where the mud's not flying or the ammunition's not flying. And there are cases where I think that probably is the bet, because the children are just being eaten alive by anxiety and everything else that's going in them. And the conflict, the court isn't, if it's not going anywhere, it's not getting you anywhere, it's costing you a boatload of money. You're basically spending anything you could, like, to do that, and it's not doing anything, it's not getting you any progress. That might be a time to reconsider, but don't necessarily step away. Find whatever in that you possibly can, and that's one avenue when I'm talking to target parents, is finding creative ways to stay in.
Hmm.
And often I can, if I'm working with the alienated parent as well, getting them to kind of, I don't know how to phrase this properly, but look like the good person. It's a just making sure that they're participating because they're being a good parent, and instead of using conflict to get ahead, we use cooperation to get ahead. And that's a little bit trickier on my end to navigate, but that's sometimes. But stepping away completely, I think, I don't know that that's always the best route to go. You have to have some sort of way to say, or to keep out there, I love you and I'm not leaving you.
Yeah, that's so important. We have a few questions that we'll get through, and then I had one last question for you, Tina. So Lisa says, is it better to use other topics to stimulate critical thinking, or is it okay to use specific examples of how the child was alienated to get the child to begin to put it together? I have one thought on this before I want to hear Tina your answer, but I remember I think my stepmom must have been doing some jujitsu parenting without even knowing it, when because my brothers were definitely alienated from my stepmom, not my dad, but my stepmom. And there were points where my brother would just be like, they would come up to her as little kids and be like, "My mom hates you," and my stepmom would be like, "Oh well." I think I don't hate your mom. I think she sounds like a really nice woman. Like, or you can point out, different things that are inappropriate or that are not the right thing to do, which might stimulate in their brain the next time their parent says something or does something to them, might remind them that's not how we act.
Yes.
What do you think about that question?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it depends on the age too. Like you've got to be age appropriate with it. I have found that the best approaches are indirect. So sometimes you do need to confront things head on, but like finding a children's book about how we have empathy for people or how we treat people or having respect, and kind of easing in those things, and so when the child comes and says something to you, then you can go, I was thinking about that book that we read, and then start letting them think, well, what is, if they discover the answer, it's better than you telling them the answer. I think we've kind of moved away from experiential learning so far that we've kind of forgotten how to do that. But
Mhm.
experiencing things and critically thinking through instead of just being told what to think,
Yeah.
that's lost art, but it needs to be brought back, because that's, but when you directly just say what you're doing is wrong, that kind of brings up defenses. But if you kind of lovingly draw it out with questions or other ways to point it out, maybe other examples of people doing something similar and letting them make the connection,
Yeah.
it that sears your brain better.
Something that I've thought about before is talking about, like, recent news or media articles with your kids, or just challenging the idea that don't believe everything you think. You can't believe all of your thoughts, or engaging with them about, okay, so I know a lot of well, don't tell them this, but I'm speaking to you guys right now. Like, I know a lot of alienators really play the victimhood mentality and the victim narrative, and that's a bigger problem we're having in all of society. So you can talk about and point out, hey, have you noticed like a victim mentality with your in society, or with your schoolmates, or in your classmates, or anything like that? Like, and why do you don't just talk about other things that might relate back in a very indirect way?
Right. And accountability is huge too. So being accountable to things. And what that means is setting an example. So if you screw up and you say or do something that's hurtful to somebody else or to that child, especially, taking ownership of it. And I think it's especially hard for target parents to admit anything is wrong because it'll get thrown back in their face somewhere. But in reality, vulnerability requires strength. And
Mhm.
you can't just come at it like I'm always right, I'm always right, I'm always right, and I'm not fallible. Apology should never have a but. It's just like, I was wrong, I should not have said that, and I'm very, very sorry, and I didn't mean to hurt you. And then you can talk about the reasons why, but there's difference between giving a reason and making an excuse.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
you have giving a reason and explaining, like, I was really tired and hungry and had had a really bad day, and I completely lost it, and I'm so sorry that I yelled at you for that. That was not appropriate. You are not the reason that I did that, or the reason that I should have been yelling in that way, and I apologize for that. Please forgive me. And
Mhm.
then instilling that idea of forgiveness and continuing to do that. And also being able to set boundaries where yes, if people make mistakes, but if I keep making the same mistake over and over again, eventually there's got to be a boundary instead of forgiveness. Like, I'll
Yeah.
still you, but you're now in a more outer circle. You can't be in so close anymore. You've kind of bumped yourself out a little bit.
I'm so glad that you mentioned all of that because a huge thing that we all talk about as adults who've realized all of this is we're all, I mean, people I talk to and myself, like we're just always looking to see if people can take accountability or if they can't. Because I don't think any of us, I don't think I've met one person who's gotten accountability out of the alienator parent or an apology. And that's a huge betrayal. And and then you're looking to see if your targeted parent can apologize and own up to things, and most of the time it seems like they can. So that's something that the child like realizes, I think, as you get older and older, but definitely important to model. So this is going to be our last question, and then I have an important question for Tina at the end that might put you on the spot a little bit, but it's make you think about something. But okay, so Stacy says, with the divorce custody battle being so emotional, what suggestion would you give to bring someone down from the emotional tornado, see logic, and behave accordingly?
Okay, so that actually working with target parents is probably the toughest thing that I have to do is because I don't have time and I'm not a sugar coatery type anyway. Like I'm pretty straightforward most of the time and I'll get down in the mud with you. I will cry with people all day long if it's but at the same time I'm like, "Yes, but you have to do this." Like I don't have time to, hold your hand for months to get you moving forward. So I'm pretty straightforward about like I get it. It's not fair. I understand. Yes, you've been wronged. All of those things. I agree with you. Now knock it off. I need you to stop doing this. You can't act that way or you can't say those things. And it's really really hard because you have been hurt. You are dysregulated. This absolutely sucks and there's no way around it. And I wish that I could change that for people, but the only thing that I can control is is what I can control. I can't control other people. So I'm going to tell you straight that you have if yes, you can feel that way, but you can't act this way. And if you need to go and blow stuff up or go to a rage room or whatever it is that you do to let off steam or and I've had parents like just yell at me for 15-20 minutes and just let them get it out like it doesn't hurt me. It's like I'm fine, bring it on. So we'll fight for a little while and then they'll bring it down. But then when we're going into some sessions or we're doing something specific, they've got to be able to control that. And I'm so sorry that I have to say that to anybody who's been through it and be like, I get that that sucks, but you have to suck it up. If this is what you want, this is what you have to do to get it. And sometimes that's not really what anybody wants to hear, but I'm not doing anybody any favors by sugarcoating it or somehow making it sound like you can get something that you may not be able to get because that's not helping you either.
Yeah, I wonder if it would be helpful for targeted parents to like truly imagine what they would advise their friend to do if their friend had just lost a child. And you really got to take care of yourself. I mean, you really do. You really have to take care of yourself. So I just wanted to know, I'm sure that you've seen some targeted parents who've had more success than others with reconnecting with their kids and getting that relationship back. And I was just wondering if you could talk about maybe a few, maybe three or four of the best practices that you've seen these successful targeted parents do. What are the parents who are reconnecting with their children? What are they doing right?
They're doing that. They're staying calm and staying and keeping their emotions in check and their need to be right. Um, the need to win or to if your motivation if you're I motivated, you're probably going to have less success than if you are child focused motivated because when it's about you, your pain, the things that have happened to you, your hurts. And listen, I've been through this in my own experience, not alienation, but those, I understand how ridiculous I sound. I truly do. Because I've had just little tiny pinpricks of feeling jealous or resentful in my own divorce. And I had a very amicable divorce and all the rest of it, but my child still suffered. And there are moments when I get kind of like a jealousy or resentment, and I have to think to myself, like, this is not about me. I've got to stop thinking that way. And that's hard for me who's not in an alien. So I am not diminishing at all the experience of the or the pain that people are going through. But I know to be successful at this, you've got to take yourself out of the equation and not make it about you for as long as you can and as much as you can. And when you slip and fall and make it about yourself, just get back up and keep walking, because, and dust yourself off and keep going, because you are going to do that. But if you want true success and long-term good relationship, healthy relationship with your kids, you've got to be able to have humility and emotional regulation, and to be able to take care of yourself. So get yourself a good therapist who understands alienation, because one who doesn't might say some things that are kind of hurtful, or maybe give you some bad advice. If you have an attorney who doesn't understand, but they're a good attorney, don't look to them for emotional support. That's not what they that's not what they do. Get some friends, make sure your family, make sure you're taking care of yourself. Go kayaking, surfing, whatever it is that floats your boat, float it. Spend time being kind to yourself. Be around people who are positive, because when your child comes back, never say if, but when, because I've
And
had somebody come back after 40 years. I think that anybody can do that. So when they come back, they're not meeting a disgruntled, angry, resentful human. They're meeting somebody who loved and missed them and wanted, I'm going to start to get emotional, wants them back. And that has been waiting for them.
that was my dad. That was my dad. I mean, he just did everything that you just said. I'm so grateful that he did that, and so grateful. And I can't even imagine how painful it would be to be in that situation. And if it were me, I would probably blame myself too. I don't know if all parents do that, but I would probably blame myself. But you said to not take it, don't make it a you thing. But I think that was also with like not taking it personally. Don't make it a you thing. Like, don't take that hate or that anger, that fear personally, because you could be anyone. It's the fact that your ex has probably a lot of mental health or personality disorder. It's like, don't take that personally. That's really, really great advice. Thank you guys so much for being here today. And I think if you joined later, I think it's definitely worth rewatching the beginning of the chat, because what Tina said regarding the 5-factor model and outlining your own case, I think is really important information we might need to do another video on. This is, it's like ask again, it's asking for so much from people who are just in so much pain, justifiably so. And my heart really goes out to all of you guys. And Tina, thank you so much for your time, for your honest and open communication, and all this valuable, very valuable advice. Your work every day. I knew that it would be so awesome for people to be able to ask you questions and for you to give them um, all the really awesome information that you have. But man, it's really, really, really sad, really sad. Is there anything that you want to end with that you would like to say?
Yeah, actually I would, because and I do like, I do get emotional about it. Don't give up. Just don't give up. It's don't give up, because these kids need you and they love you. They do love you. But what they go through is undeniably horrible. And Maddie, that's why I love Maddie so much, because just her being able to come out and sort of advocate for the kids, because there are a lot of parents groups, tons of them, and tons of advocacy groups, and there just aren't enough representation of the kids who are going through it, and we don't really hear their voices, except for the voices of the kids who are being pushed into the spotlight right now, who are saying this doesn't work, this is not true. And so the kids who are really like in it right now, they don't have voices to speak up. And sometimes I go to court and I just break it down. I do break down because it's hard to watch. I've I've watched kids kind of
Give up.
give up, and they'll hold on for a little while, like they'll stay in the fight, and they'll stay in the tug of war. And I have literally watched them when they surrender and go, okay, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to surrender and I'm going to pick a side. And that moment for me is probably the most defeating thing that I can see. Now, a lot of the cases I get them after they've already done that.
Yeah.
Have been enough where I've watched them do it, and it is so heartbreaking. And sometimes I get mad at the target parent too, and this is not about blaming, it's just more like, because I sit there and tell them, please don't do this, please don't do this, and they are lost in their emotions. So when I say, like, you've got to control it, they're only seeing the injustice that's happening to them. And I understand it, I get it, but I'm like, you're breaking your kid, you're breaking your kid, please just stop. There's a biblical story about
I think I know what you're going to say. The
yeah,
baby that they were arguing over
yeah,
who's the
Solomon.
man.
I first started the Resolution Center when I really didn't know what it was going to be yet, but the working model was the Sword of Solomon, because it was kind of the model of wisdom to me, where Solomon is these two women come, and one of the women has lost the baby, and their baby has died, and so they're both claiming the live baby is theirs. And Solomon said, just they get tired of their argument, and I can hear judges like in their brain, like, I'm sick of these people arguing and I can't take it anymore. And he's like, bring me a sword, I'm going to cut the baby in half, and I'm going to each give you half. So the baby is going to now die, but the mother, who's the child actually belongs to, says, no, let it live, give it to her, just give it to her, because that to me is a best indicator of real love. Like, I'm going to lose you, but you're going to live, like, I'm going to make this better for you. So when I say that this needs to be less I oriented and more child focused, it's not that I want people to give up their children. It's more like, we've got to focus on what is going to make them better, and then work from there. And that means the court system too, because believe me, that needs an overhaul. But that's not a ship that's going to turn quickly or easily. So we've just got to keep educating people on where the focus really needs to be, and start calling out things that are wrong, but just do it in love and do it with empathy and compassion, because if you don't, then everybody just the children get killed. That's just it. They're in the middle of it, and they're the ones getting hit.
I give you 2 thumbs up for that one. That was beautiful. That was beautiful. If you guys would like to contact Tina or follow her and her work and what she does, it's Tina Meyer with the Resolution Center, Jacksonville, Florida. Yeah, we're gonna join forces and make some awesome things happen in the future.
And
Um,
ready.
so thank you, everybody, being here tonight. Thank you, Tina, so much for your time. And yeah, don't give up. Never give up. Never give up. Never, never, never give up on your kids. Even if you have to love them from afar, express your love in a journal. Never give up.
And that one.
So
Thanks,
I'm
Matt, for
having a
letting.
good having a good April. Stay tuned for PA Day. We're having a big awareness blitz media campaign. So you can print out all these posters that Bree put together, grab your friends and family, and go flyer some areas wherever you can put public posters. If you want to send us pictures and videos, that'd be awesome, because we want to put together, we want to do a map and see how many areas we can reach, and then maybe a video, a collaborative video. April 25th, we're also having our panel discussion that we did in Colorado. We're going to post that, and I'm really, really, really excited. I have not received that footage yet, but I'm excited to see it, and excited to talk more about that whole experience. I vlogged the entire trip, so I have like a behind the scenes of what it was like for all of us to meet together in the first time. And let me just say, we were laughing like 95% of the trip. Like, I could not breathe. I was laughing so hard multiple times. It was just amazing. Like, I felt understood, truly understood, for the first time since all of this started. These women are awesome, and I think there's a lot of hope for the future. I can't do this alone, and I don't want to do this alone. And we have a team now, a team of 7 of us. It's grown, and yeah, big things are coming. So keep the hope, and thank you so much. Yeah, everybody's saying thank you, and it's been amazing. So Tina, that was all you. You have some really, really, really profound insights to offer, and I'm sure a lot of people here tonight would like to pick your brain for another few hours. And we should film some more things in the future too. Yes, but everybody go out there tomorrow and take the day by the horns, or if I don't know if that's what you say, but yeah, it's Monday, so it's a new week. Okay, I'm really bad at ending things. Okay, bye everybody. Thanks for being here.